Hey everyone, welcome back to English Medium Podcast. Today, we're stretching this conversation into something bigger because a lot of people don't quit from one huge failure. They quit from 100 tiny moments that quietly pile up.
Yeah, and that's the part people miss. They imagine quitting as dramatic, but usually it's just one tired thought after another. One day you say, maybe tomorrow, and tomorrow keeps getting smaller.
Exactly. So let's slow it down and look at the pattern. At first, starting feels exciting, almost clean, like the whole world is giving you a fresh page and asking what you'll write on it.
And you write something bold, obviously. You write the version of you who wakes up early, drinks water, reads 10 books, and somehow never gets distracted by the phone. Very heroic, very suspicious.
Suspicious is right. But that version feels real in the beginning because your imagination fills in all the missing effort. You can picture the success long before you've done the boring part.
That's the trap. The brain loves a good preview. It gives you all the reward feelings now, before the work has actually had time to test you. So you think the plan is easier than it really is.
And then the middle arrives. Quietly, no music, no applause, no dramatic scene. Just ordinary days where the work is still there, but the excitement has cooled down a little.
That middle is brutal because nothing is obviously broken. You're still showing up, still trying, still thinking you should feel proud, but the results are moving in a way your eyes can't catch yet.
So you start wondering if something is wrong with you. You compare the inside of your real life to the polished outside of everyone else's, and suddenly your own effort looks small.
Which is unfair, by the way. People always compare their rough draft to someone else's final edit. Then they act surprised when the rough draft looks messy. Of course it does.
And because the progress is small, your mind tries to label it as nothing. But small progress is still progress. It is often the only kind that survives long enough to matter.
Yeah, and that's hard to respect because small wins do not feel cinematic. Nobody claps because you understood one more sentence in English or kept one more promise to yourself.
But that one more sentence matters. That one more rep matters. That one more day matters. The body, the brain, the habit system all learn through repetition, not through grand speeches.
Right, but repetition is boring, and boredom makes people suspicious. They think if it's not exciting anymore, it must not be working. Honestly, that's one of the biggest misunderstandings we have.
Let's stay there for a second. A lot of people think comfort means correct and discomfort means wrong. But growth usually feels a little awkward before it feels normal.
Absolutely. If you're doing something new, it should feel unfamiliar. If it feels totally easy, you might be repeating what you already know instead of becoming someone new.
So the beginning is beautiful, but it can mislead you. It makes commitment look like excitement. And when excitement fades, people think commitment has failed, when really it has only started.
That is a good distinction. Excitement is a spark. Commitment is the firewood. You need both, but one of them burns out fast if you keep pretending it can do the whole job.
And in the middle, you're forced to find out whether you're attached to the feeling or to the actual goal. That's when the real question shows up. Do I want the result or just the identity?
Oh, yes. Because identity is seductive. It feels good to say, I am becoming disciplined. I am becoming fluent. I am becoming healthy. But Becoming means staying through the awkward part.
Exactly. And staying is not glamorous. It does not always feel inspiring. Sometimes staying looks like doing a tiny version of the task when your energy is low and your confidence is lower.
That tiny version still counts. If the goal is to write, write one paragraph. If the goal is English, read one page. If the goal is exercise, do 10 minutes. Tiny is not meaningless.
No, it isn't. Tiny is the bridge between intention and identity. Without tiny actions, intention just stays a nice idea you keep talking about.
And people talk about it a lot, don't they? They keep saying, I'm going to start, I'm going to restart, I'm getting back on track. At some point, the restart becomes the habit instead of the habit.
That's such an important point. Repeated restarting can trick you into thinking you're changing when you are really just circling the same beginning over and over.
So maybe the first lesson is simple. Don't glorify the start too much. It matters, sure, but it's the least reliable part. The start is all promise. The middle is all proof.
I like that. The start is promise. The middle is proof. And proof takes time, which is exactly why people get impatient. They want certainty before the evidence has had a chance to grow.
Humans are funny like that. We want trust immediately, but trust is usually earned by surviving the dull days, the messy days, and the nearly quit days.
So let's talk about those nearly quit days, because that is where a lot of people misread themselves. They think tired means incapable, and slow means stuck.
And sometimes tired just means tired. Not broken, not lazy, not doomed, just tired. But tired people are terrible judges of their own future, honestly.
They really are. When you're drained, everything looks heavier. One task feels like 10. One setback feels like a verdict. One quiet day feels like the whole thing is collapsing.
That's when the brain starts writing dramatic headlines. Nothing is working. I'm behind. Everyone else is ahead. This isn't for me. The brain gets theatrical when it's anxious.
And not very accurate. It forgets all the invisible evidence. It forgets the days you did continue. It forgets the skills you didn't have before. It forgets that slow change still changes you.
That's the irony. The brain demands proof of progress, but it also ignores proof of progress when the proof is boring. It wants fireworks, not footprints.
Maybe that's why reflection matters. You have to pause long enough to notice what improved. Otherwise, you only remember what is still unfinished, and that creates a false story.
Yeah, a false story that says nothing is happening. But something is always happening. Habits are forming, confidence is shifting, tolerance is expanding, whether you notice it or not.
And then comes comparison, which makes everything worse. Because comparison takes your private timeline and throws it against someone else's public image.
Which is an ugly matchup. You're comparing your behind-the-scenes work to their highlight reel. Of course you feel small. The game is rigged from the start.
But people still do it because comparison feels like information. It feels like checking where you stand. In reality, it often just tells you where you feel insecure.
Yes, and insecurity is a noisy narrator. It turns other people's success into evidence against you, even when their path has nothing to do with yours.
So the question becomes, what if your pace isn't a problem? What if your path is just yours? Different speed does not mean wrong direction.
I like that, because it removes some shame. Not all of it, obviously, but some. And sometimes, removing a little shame is enough to keep a person moving.
That's true. Shame often pushes people to quit early because quitting feels cleaner than being seen as unfinished. But unfinished is not failed. Unfinished is just in progress.
And progress rarely feels tidy while it's happening. People want the after photo while living inside the before. That's not how growth works, unfortunately.
No, it isn't. Growth usually feels like repetition with tiny differences, a little less fear, a little more skill, a little more patience. It doesn't announce itself every day.
So when someone says, maybe this isn't for me, what they often mean is, this is harder than I expected. That is not the same sentence, but the brain loves to blur them.
Yes, harder than expected is a fact. Not for me is an identity claim. One is temporary pressure. The other is a story about who you are.
And stories are powerful. Once people tell themselves a story enough times, they start defending it, even if the evidence is weak. They'll protect the story more than the dream.
That's heartbreaking, because the dream was never the real enemy. The real enemy is the moment you start believing discomfort is a final answer.
Discomfort is usually just a question, not an answer. It asks whether you can stay present without demanding instant payoff. Most people don't like that question.
Because it requires patience, and patience feels passive. But it's not passive at all. Patience is active restraint. It is choosing not to abandon something too soon.
Good point. People think persistence means grinding harder every second, but sometimes persistence just means returning tomorrow with less drama and more steadiness.
And that steadiness matters in learning English, too. You don't become fluent in one heroic week. You become fluent through ordinary exposure, correction, repetition, and time.
Same with almost everything worth doing. Health, writing, relationships, business, confidence. The pattern is boring on paper and transformative in life.
Let's talk about the mind lying to you, because it's a big one. Your brain wants immediate feedback. If it doesn't get it, it often concludes the effort is useless.
That's a terrible system, but common. The brain confuses delay with failure. If the result isn't visible now, it assumes the work has no value.
Yet a lot of important things work slowly. Seeds, muscles, comprehension, trust, skill. They all grow beneath the surface before they show up in a way you can brag about.
And because they grow beneath the surface, people get impatient and dig them up. Then they wonder why nothing had time to form. That's a rough metaphor, but it fits.
It does fit. Sometimes quitting early is just digging up the seed because you wanted proof too soon. But growth has a schedule that does not care about our nervousness.
I mean, rude, but true. Life does not speed up just because we are anxious. If anything, anxiety makes the waiting feel longer and the goal feel further away.
Which is why it helps to lower the question. Instead of asking, "Am I there yet?" ask, "Did I continue today?" That question is much kinder and much more useful.
And probably more honest, because continuing is something you can measure. Being there is often vague and emotionally loaded. People need something they can actually answer.
Exactly. A clear question. A clear question can keep you grounded. Otherwise, your mind turns every slow day into a referendum on your whole future, and that is exhausting.
Exhausting and unnecessary. Most people don't need a whole new personality. They need a smaller task, a clearer reason, and a little less self-interrogation at midnight.
Now, let's move into discomfort, because this is where many people misread the process completely. They assume pain means damage, but sometimes pain means adaptation.
Like muscles after a workout, or awkward silence when you're learning a language and your mouth hasn't caught up to your thoughts yet. Uncomfortable, yes. A sign to quit? Not always.
Exactly. New skills feel clumsy before they feel smooth. That clumsiness is not proof of failure. It's proof that your body and brain are still learning the shape of the thing.
And the shape changes with practice. The first time feels strange. The 10th time feels less strange. The 100th time might even feel natural, but only if you stay long enough.
That's the hidden cost of quitting early. You never get to the part where hard things begin to feel familiar. So every restart feels like a fresh mountain instead of a path.
And every mountain looks impossible when you're standing at the base and exaggerating the slope in your head. The mind loves to turn inconvenience into destiny.
It really does. But if you remind yourself that awkward is normal, then you stop treating awkwardness like an emergency. That can save a lot of good efforts.
There's also something about embarrassment. People quit when they feel behind because they don't want to be visibly learning in public. But learning in public is basically how learning works.
Yes, nobody starts fluent, strong, skilled, or confident. Everyone starts somewhere awkward. The difference is whether they can tolerate being a beginner long enough to improve.
Beginners want to be advanced. Humans are impatient by nature. But the beginner phase is not a punishment. It's the entrance fee.
Beautifully put. And if you refuse the entrance fee, you never get inside. So maybe the real work is not forcing confidence. It's making peace with the early awkwardness.
That's a much better goal. Because confidence often shows up after evidence, not before it. People want confidence to arrive first, but sometimes confidence is the receipt, not the purchase.
I love that. Confidence is the receipt. You earn it by doing the thing, not by waiting to feel ready forever.
And that connects back to comparison. Because when you compare your beginner chapter to someone else's middle chapter, you forget they had their own awkward receipts too.
Exactly. Everyone has the hidden part. The difference is just who is willing to keep going through it. Some people keep going quietly, and that quiet persistence becomes their advantage.
Quiet persistence is underrated. It doesn't look impressive in the moment, but it compounds. It turns little efforts into noticeable change, even if the change shows up late.
Which brings us to one of the saddest patterns. People stop right before the late change appears. They mistake the waiting room for the final answer.
And that waiting room can be cruel, because it feels endless when you're inside it. You think you've been waiting forever, but the clock is often lying to your emotions.
True. A hard week feels like a hard year when you're tired. So we need better tools than emotion alone. We need structure, perspective, and a way to stay steady.
First tool, shrink the task. If the goal is too big, the nervous system panics. But if you make the next step tiny, the body stops arguing with you so much.
Exactly. Tiny steps lower resistance. They make starting less traumatic. And once you start, momentum usually does more than motivation ever could.
Second tool, remember your real reason. Not the flashy reason you say in public, the honest reason that actually matters when nobody is watching.
That honest reason is the anchor. When the mood changes, the anchor keeps you from drifting off course. Without it, every bad day becomes an excuse to leave.
Third tool, accept imperfect consistency. People think they have to be perfect to be serious. Honestly, that belief destroys more progress than laziness does.
Yes, perfection sounds noble, but it's fragile. One off day and the whole thing feels ruined. Imperfect consistency is sturdier because it expects human life to happen.
And human life is always happening. Schedules change, moods change, energy changes. A realistic plan has to make room for that, or it becomes fantasy dressed as discipline.
Fourth tool, ask a better question. Instead of asking, "Do I feel motivated?" ask, "Can I continue a little longer?" That question is simpler and more actionable.
Motivation is a mood. Continuation is a decision. If you rely only on mood, you hand your future to the weather inside your head.
That's a great line. The weather inside your head can change fast. One cloudy thought, and suddenly your whole plan looks like a bad idea.
Which is why systems matter. A system does not care whether you are inspired. It just creates a path for you to follow when inspiration is busy somewhere else.
And that's comforting, actually, because you do not need to feel magical every day. You need a rhythm. You need a way back in when the day has gotten messy.
So maybe persistence is less about intensity and more about return. Returning after distraction. Returning after boredom. Returning after doubt.
Yes, return is the quiet superpower. It says, "I drifted, but I'm back. I struggled, but I'm back. I felt discouraged, but I'm back."
That mindset changes the whole story. Instead of asking whether you are flawless, you ask whether you can re-enter the work without turning one stumble into a full stop.
And that's where so many people win or lose. Not in the big emotional speeches, but in the small re-entries. The daily choice to come back matters more than people think.
It really does. Most success is just repeated return, repeated attention, repeated effort. Glamorous from far away, ordinary up close.
Let's go deeper into the quiet truth. Staying is sometimes the bravest thing you can do. Not forcing, not rushing, not panicking, just staying with the process.
Because staying means tolerating the unfinished version of your life without insulting it. It means allowing the current stage to be a stage instead of a failure.
And that perspective can be healing. If you stop calling the middle a disaster, you can actually use it. You can learn from it instead of fighting it all the time.
Right. The middle teaches patience, humility, and realism. Not the sexy lessons, but the ones that keep you from self-sabotage.
And it's funny because the things that feel slow in the moment are often the things that build the deepest strength. They ask you to be quiet, and quiet is hard.
Quiet is hard because it gives you space to doubt, but it also gives you space to notice. If you stay quiet long enough, you start seeing what is actually changing.
You see your reaction soften. You see your memory improve. You see your confidence stop depending on one good day. That kind of change is easy to miss and easy to underestimate.
And once you notice it, you gain evidence. Evidence reduces panic. Panic is a huge reason people quit early. When the mind calms down, the path looks more possible.
So the work is not just effort. It's also interpretation. You have to interpret your experience wisely, or your feelings will write a misleading story for you.
That's why reflection is so useful. If you only live the day can fool you. If you reflect, you can separate temporary discomfort from actual lack of progress.
Exactly. Reflection gives context, and context is what keeps a rough day from becoming a wrong life. Those are very different things.
Very different. A rough day is information. A wrong life is a conclusion. People make conclusions too quickly when they're tired.
So let's be kind to tired people, including ourselves. Tired does not mean incapable. Tired means the system needs support, rest, or a smaller step.
And maybe a reminder that one difficult moment does not cancel the whole journey. That's a lesson people need to hear more than once.
Definitely. Especially because quitting often feels justified in the moment. It feels efficient. It feels like relief. But relief is not always wisdom.
Sometimes relief is just escape, wearing nice shoes. I say that gently, but it's true. Not every urge to stop is a sign. Some are just stress asking for permission.
Which means we need to pause before obeying the first impulse. A pause creates room for a better answer than panic.
And sometimes the better answer is rest, not quitting. People mix those up all the time. Rest returns you to the work. Quitting removes the work entirely.
That distinction matters a lot. If you are exhausted, take a break. If you are discouraged, make the task smaller. If you are bored, reconnect with the reason. But don't rush to end what only needs care.
That's solid advice. Care is underrated. We treat goals like machines, but they're closer to relationships. They need attention, repair, patience, and occasional forgiveness.
Yes, and that forgiveness can be aimed at yourself, too. You are allowed to be a person who is learning in public, learning slowly and still learning sincerely.
That permission is powerful. It removes some of the shame that makes people hide, lie, or quit. Honesty is way easier when you're not trying to perform perfection.
So maybe the conversation is really about making peace with the middle. The middle is not glamorous, but it is honest. It's where the real habits form.
And it's where the real character shows up too. Anyone can be excited on day 1. Day 30 is where you find out what your priorities actually are.
Day 30, day 60, day 90, those are the days that tell the truth. Not loudly, but clearly. If you've stayed, something in you is becoming stronger.
And if you haven't stayed yet, you haven't failed. You just have a pattern to understand. Patterns can be changed, but first they have to be seen.
Exactly. Awareness comes before change. You can't fix what you keep calling random. You have to notice the pattern. Excitement, middle, doubt, urge to quit.
Then you can interrupt it. Maybe not perfectly, but better. And better is often enough to create a different future.
That is such an important phrase. Better is often enough. People wait for perfect, but life usually rewards those who keep moving a little better each time.
Yeah, and a little better repeated often becomes a lot better. That's the whole secret, if you can call it a secret. It's more like a disciplined repetition.
So when the voice says, "Stop now," maybe answer with, "Not yet, not forever, not dramatically, just not yet."
I like that. Not yet is calm. It gives the moment some space. It says the feeling is real without letting the feeling make all the decisions.
And that's the heart of the episode, I think. You don't always need to do more. Sometimes you need to stay, to wait, to continue quietly.
Stay through the boring part. Stay through the unclear part. Stay through the part where nobody else sees the effort but you.
Because those hidden days are not empty days. They are the days where persistence becomes identity, and identity becomes outcome.
Exactly. The quiet days are where the shift happens. You might not feel it in the moment, but you often recognize it only after you've crossed the old line.
And then you look back and realize the change was happening all along, just not in a way that shouted for attention.
Which is kind of beautiful, actually. It means the most important growth can happen without applause. It can happen in your ordinary life in small and steady ways.
So if you're listening and you feel stuck, maybe don't ask, "Why am I so behind?" Ask, "What if I am just in the middle?" That question changes the whole emotional temperature.
And if you're in the middle, you are not lost. You are on the bridge. Bridges are meant to be crossed, not worshipped. Keep doing.
Beautifully said. Keep going. But keep going with kindness. Lower the task, protect the reason, respect the small wins, and let time do part of the work.
And when you want to quit, remember that the feeling of quitting is not always the truth of the situation. Sometimes it's just fatigue or fear or a temporary bad read.
That's right. Feelings matter, but they are not always final. Let them speak, then let them pass through. Don't hand them the whole microphone.
Yeah, maybe not the whole podcast either. But seriously, the people who keep going are usually not the most dramatic. They're the ones who can tolerate the quiet middle.
And tolerate being unfinished for a while. That might be the most human skill of all, to keep faith with yourself before the results arrive.
That's a good way to put it. Keep faith with yourself. Not because everything is easy, but because you know the work has meaning even before it pays off.
So let's end on this. If today feels slow, that doesn't mean it's empty. If progress feels invisible, that doesn't mean it isn't happening.
And if you're tempted to leave right before the shift, maybe stay one more day, one more rep, one more page, one more honest try.
Because sometimes the next little step is the one that changes everything.
And the middle, as annoying as it is where that change quietly begins.
This is Lily.
And this is Andrew.
Thanks for staying with us.
And thanks for not quitting